So I think I've got this pretty much laid out how I would like it to look. So I'm going to start now with my sticking. So the whole placing of things onto your panels or your paper is something that you need to play with really, and need to be happy yourself that you've placed things in an area that you want them to be. So I'm just using PVA and a glue brush, or a cheap paintbrush that you don't want to use for painting will suffice. Sometimes we lay elements over the top of each other, so I just need to know where this sits in relation to this, for example. So that seems to be fine there. This is where your fingers get very sticky and you end up picking up bits and pieces of paper around your workstation that you don't necessarily want to have on your hands. So, like that for example, bits of paper going in my glue and then sticking to my hand. So be prepared for a small amount of frustration as you work. Happens to the best of us. So then I'm going to place that on with the PVA. I'm just going to PVA over the top. Now this is where you need to make sure that any images or prints or paper that you have is not going to interfere, and once the wet of the glue activates things. So for example, if I was using something like a watercoloured piece of paper that I'd produced previously and was repurposing for this, I might then find that the watercolour pigment starts to run because the glue will reactivate it. So you just need to be a little bit careful about things like that. So just lay your pieces of paper where you want them to go. Make sure you use enough of the glue. PVA does dry clear, so if it goes onto your substrate, don't worry, because it should dry clear. And that's where you need to make sure that you're using something that will dry clear, otherwise you might run into problems. So as you can see, I often use kind of random pieces that just go along the edges. I quite like to kind of edge my work. Now I might need to overlap these, which means I don't want to be sticking down the previous one over the top of something that I want to go over the top of that, if that makes sense. So for example, I need to stick that there, and then probably want to place that down here slightly. So I don't want it to interfere with my semicircle. So you will end up covering up parts of your underpainting that you've created, but that's okay. Just make sure you're not covering up areas that you really like, because that underpainting will then sort of be gone forever really. So these are kind of fabricy pieces here. It's a fabric of sorts. So I'm going to use my more heavy duty glue, and this looks really thick and tacky. It does dry clear, but it takes some time to dry. So I'm not too worried that it looks white at the moment, because it will dry. I just need to make sure that I put it in the right place and don't pick up other pieces of paper. So just flatten that down, and then this piece here is heavy-ish. This is the kind of flock piece of paper. So I'm going to use my slightly heavier glue just to place that down there. Press that down, and then use my PVA again. Stick this piece down here. Quite like the fact that this homemade, handmade paper, not homemade by me, I hasten to add, but it's got like a almost felt-like feel to it. It's actually quite nice. It's quite tactile, which is quite good fun. So I've tried to use different elements here. So I've got some tissue paper, and I've got some textured paper, and I've got different things going on which counterbalance the underpainting. So they will either provide a bit of colour contrast or a bit of visual contrast. So this, for example, is introducing darker values because there's black. And there's no black paint on the substrate. So I've just tried to introduce something that's a different element. So we have different elements in our work. Stick that down there. Good practice to just do the other side of it as well, because it just helps to kind of double stick it down. Just make sure you don't use too much glue. As I say, it does dry clear, and you can also use it to kind of varnish / seal the painting as well. So I'm hoping that your compositions have come out different from mine, that you're using your own colour palette and your own colour preferences and your own types of image that you enjoy, because we don't want to be just following things that look like what the teacher is making. We want to start developing our own discernment and getting our own choices and preferences into our work. So this really is just a question of making sure that you've got your placement where you want it, making sure that you glue things down sufficiently, and making sure that you're happy with the overall composition. And also, as I say, don't forget to kind of colour contrast as well. I'm going to use the thicker glue. Wondering what the thicker glue is. It's just super heavy gel, which is a Liquitex product. So I'm thinking of colour contrast here. So yellow against turquoise and pink will give you some contrast. And then again we've got black, just to add a bit of dark value to lighter areas. Obviously if something is flocked or textured, you don't really want to be pasting on the other side of it. You might get pieces where it wrinkles. So what I would suggest is, if it's still wet and it will allow you to, then just peel it off to the point where it's wrinkled and then reapply. So that's got a thicker medium there to just glue it down. So all of my elements are now stuck down, and that's my first panel done. And the second panel really is just a process of repeating the same thing so that you end up with all of your elements stuck down where you want them to be. So I'll leave this video here because I'm not really teaching you anything else by just doing the same thing here as I've done here. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. It's something a bit different, and it gets you thinking about lots of different elements of things that we've studied during this course. Helps you with your composition and your colour, helps you with your contrast and looking at different elements and balance and repetition and rhythm and all of those good principles of art that we need to incorporate in our work for it to be successful. So as always, feel free to post your work in the gallery, and I will see you next time.